Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, longtime collaborator with Tom DeLonge of Blink-182, Angels and Airwaves, Boxcar Racer, etc. And today I want to talk about our new book, Time Rider. So I got back from Dragon Con last week and a couple of things happened. First, I received a box of books from my publisher and I shot a little video of myself opening them. And then I also went down to the Blink-182 concert in Raleigh and was backstage with Tom, and I posted a picture of me and Tom hanging out. And I put them on Instagram, and these combined got about 30,000 views very quickly. And it occurred to me that we haven't been talking about this book. It's been a really busy year, but I figured maybe now would be a good time to start actually talking about it. Say what it is, how it happened, what it's going to be. Now, there's going to be like official stuff coming out from To the Stars, that is the publisher. So this is just me talking. This is just my take. This is not an official thing. This is just me sharing some thoughts about the process and the book itself. So, as you can see, we begin life with a motorcycle, a particular kind of motorcycle. This was one of the first ideas that Tom spoke to me about. I'm recording this in September of 2025. I'm trying to think when we actually first began work on this book. And I want to say it was like 2 years ago that we started talking about it. And the idea from the outset was that we were going to center on the agent sent by a future Earth government force who was a time traveler, who was going to come back in time into various moments within American history or global history in pursuit of temporal terrorists, if you want to call it that. The idea that people had developed some sort of technology where they can go back into the past and break up these sort of linchpin events that create the future that our hero, for want of a better word, comes from, our protagonist comes from. So we would like deliberately wanting to sort of tap into classic sci-fi stories, particularly movies about, things like 12 Monkeys and Terminator, or even something like Back to the Future, which of course is a lighter comic story. But there are a lot of these sort of stock elements in time travel films that we wanted to play with and sort of push and tweak because, of course, To the Stars and Tom are interested in not just telling sci-fi stories, but in grappling with real world stuff and with fringe history and conspiracy and things that underscore some of the actual evolution of our society in ways that don't make the conventional history books, right? And to get an access to this, Tom wanted from the outset to draw on Peter Lavender's Sinister Forces books. Peter, I've known for years now, really good guy, smart guy, and a sort of historian of strangeness, of the occult, of the phenomenon, among other things. And so we started digging into the Sinister Forces books, and I started emailing back and forth with Peter, talking to him on the phone about things that I wanted to use as the kind of building blocks of what this story was going to be about these people coming back in time on a super cool motorcycle and dealing with elements of the arcane and the strange and the sinister within actual American history. And the idea, of course, was going to be about the shaping of the future and the ideology of the people involved and all this sort of cool stuff. But it was also going to be a high-octane action adventure. I mean, the moment you see something like this, you can imagine some of the visuals. Tom has a very visual imagination, and the bike idea was something, as I said, that was there from the start, because this idea of our hero sort of speeding through time, hopping through different periods while being pursued by hostile elements on versions of their own, time travel devices and stuff. It's like, this is fun. It's cool. It's exciting. But as I say, it's also tapping into real stuff. And, for me as a writer, that's kind of essential. For my versions of fantasy and science fiction are always grounded in some form of reality. I'm not particularly, some people read fantasy simply as an escape. They say, I don't want to think about the real world. I just want, elves and dwarves or whatever, which is fine. But that has never particularly interested me. If I find I'm reading a fantasy or science fiction novel that feels utterly disconnected from my experience of the world, I kind of lose interest. Unless it's really brilliant, I want to be connected to the reality that I live in. I want to be asked to think about that reality. The world of the fantasy environment or the world of the science fiction story are, to me, sort of dark mirrors. They're supposed to reflect a version of our reality, or to put it in another word, it's like a distorting lens that you use to magnify and reshape the world, because ultimately that's what we live in and that's where we are. And for the character life, for their trials and tribulations, the things that they go through to have real resonance and power, they need to be things we can connect to. They need to be things we can relate to. And so the story has to have some sort of grounding in truth, whether that's, a spiritual truth or an emotional truth or a literal physical truth, is going to vary by story. But to me, those things are really important. So, as I say, we set out on this project about two years ago. I was working on something else at the time, so I didn't really get to grips with it until the end of 2023. And I was working on it in the sort of winter and spring of 2024. It turned in the first draft. We had done, around that time is when Trinity came out. And the original mandate was to do something of sort of the same kind of length as Trinity. And I turned that in, and Tom gave me his notes, and we sort of polished it up. And then we started getting into a kind of lengthy editorial process that took about another 6 months as we sort of wrestled with the story we'd created and found where some of our original mandate didn't stack up as well as we wanted it to. And that required some shifting, some tweaking, and some significant expansion. And as between me and Tom and some of the other folks at the Stars who were involved in the editorial process, the book got a lot bigger. I think it got a lot better, actually, but it was sort of a pain to do at the time. It's always hard when you get revision notes. This is basically, we need to rethink this and we need to do a lot more of this, It's tough. I'm busy. I have a lot of things. And sometimes you want to turn something in and move on to the next thing. And that's not always an easy thing to do, particularly when you can see that the notes that you're being given are right and that when you do the work, it'll get better. So we did that. And that meant a significant expansion. I mean, as you can see from this book, this is what? It's over 450 pages, which in today's market is a pretty substantial book. So yeah, I was revising it mostly through the tail end of last year. So it was a lot of work. And I think we were still doing sort of the smaller copy editing, proofreading type stuff well into the spring of this year, 2025. But as I say, with one thing and another, things that I was doing, things that I was tied up with, things that Tom was doing. He is, of course, as I've already said, currently on tour with Blink. And that significantly limits what we can do in terms of promotional material for books and things. So let me just say, if you saw that video that I posted about, there are a couple of really cool things about this. This is the standard hardback edition. When it comes out in the beginning of October, it will be out in hardcover, in ebook, And on audio, you'll have to wait a year or more, I think, for a paperback. But I think, for whatever this is, $25, it's actually a pretty good deal. It's a really pretty book. It's got these sort of esoteric symbols on it, which you'll have to read the book to find out about. And also it has, and this is a nice feature, in the middle of the book, there's a section of full color illustrations. It's not an attempt to tell the whole story, but it has this sort of graphic novel, comic book type layout. There's like 8 pages of that stuff, which gives you some of the visual dimension of the story. Tom, as I said, thinks very visually, and he thinks very much in terms of screen adaptation, and he wants ultimately this book, like all the stuff that we do at To the Stars, to find some kind of visual adaptation, whether it's TV or film or whatever. So, that's where we are with this. I think this is a really exciting book, but it's also kind of a grounded story. For me, of course, for all the stuff about what's real, what's not real, what's conspiracy, what's really going on. For me, the heart of a story always is character and trying to get a sense of a personal truth to that character, a sense of watching people interact and evolve and shift in the course of the story. Our main character, as I said, is Bowie. He comes from the future. And part of the fun of it is that he doesn't know what the past is going to be like till he gets there. And I find this, as a historian myself, right, as a Shakespeare professor, I find this particularly compelling, that we have a tendency to think we know what the past is, to think we could easily survive in the past. We step back 100 years, 500 years, and we just sort of blend in. And we totally wouldn't. We totally wouldn't. We would not last 10 minutes, because there are things about the past that are so radically different from the world that we know and live in that it's like we would be from another planet. I feel this all the time when I'm dealing with Elizabethan and Jacobean material, but I feel it every time I watch an old movie, and you think, where are these people from? The way that they talk, the way they interact, their accents, their assumptions, their ideologies are so alien that we would stand out like a sore thumb if we went back to the 40s, let alone going back a couple of 100 years, which is what Bowie has to do. So I find that fascinating, because he's not just navigating the events that he's sent to deal with and the dangers that he's exposed to, but he's also trying to adapt to an entirely different world, technologically, but also in terms of the way people function, the way they think, the way they communicate, all these things that have been sort of evolved out of the version of the future that he lives in, he has to deal with. And of course, he's not operating in a vacuum. Much of the story involves his working with a female journalist from the 1960s who thinks totally differently about everything, who has no idea what the hell he's talking about. And a lot of the book is about their relationship as much as everything else. It's also about, gunfights and chases and explosions and some very, very strange elements of American history and the future that it points towards. But at its heart, it's about people. All stories, all novels are about people. If they're not, there's something wrong with them. So this is part of the thing that I get excited about. So as I say, it comes out, and there's going to be, I think, To the Stars are doing a little podcast on it, and there will no doubt be other things. In the meantime, as I said, I was at the Blink show, and I got to sort of hang out with Tom and sign some books. I get to sort of properly meet the other members of the band who I'd sort of crossed paths with occasionally, but not actually spent any time with.
Hi. Hey. AJ, this is Mark. Mark, you guys have met before. Hi.
We've passed each other.
Yeah, good to see you, man. How you doing? Congrats on the book.
Thank you.
Can I post that?
And sign some books, which will be showing up at some of my events in the next 6 months or so. And then, of course, I get to see the show, which is always fun. I think that I should make it a rule that all book signings are then followed by my co-signer doing a live performance for me and 20,000 of my closest friends.
It's hard to wake up when the shades have been pulled shut. This house is haunted, it's so pathetic, it makes no sense at all. I'm right with things to say, the ones rot and fall away. We're stupid, Paul, could fix this home, I'd read it every day.
That's all I'm going to say about this for now. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out, of course, my books, particularly Time Rider, which is available for pre-order now. And check out my Patreon page, check out my little Dashery store, and look for me through my website. You can find my other socials, so you can find me on Instagram and stuff like that, if you have not done so already. And I would also say, of course, I don't just write with Tom. I just published second in my Hideki Smith series. So if you like my writing, check out some of my other stuff as well. All right, that's it. I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.